0.2 million of contributions. The employees kicked in 0.7. The net investment, how much we made from our 71 million was 4.4 million. How much we paid out to benefit payments and deductions, 5.5 million. So you can see where our end asset value, those numbers will kind of add up, and you'll end up with 72.2 million. You can see it increased by 800,000. Now, over the years, especially if you know, there's some folks that I think that they think that there's going to be sort of 40% of the fire department which is going to you know, retire in the next 5 years. That number, you know, in terms of the total benefit payment and deductions will balloon at that point. And that's where the spiraling, and one of the reasons why we think so strongly that we have to be paying more into these pension funds. So the last couple things, the historical return rate that we've gotten over the last 25 years is 7.4%. The 2013 rate of return was 7%. The 3-year return that we've got, 6.4%. The composite index, which is our benchmark, which we try to achieve, it was at 13.8, so we underperformed a bit. And the S&P returned 33%. So a lot of folks kind of like look at it and say, well, if the S&P returned 33%, why you know, why did we only return 7%? And just so you know, the state law requires us that we have to have 35% of our funds in fixed income. There's been a gigantic bull market in fixed income that's gone from sort of 14% down to 4%, and so it's going to be very hard with the way that we have to compose the fund to sort of achieve, in my view, long-term 7% rates of return. And Brian, I know, agrees with me. So I don't know if I'll leave it with that.
I'll just leave this. The point of this whole slide is that we use a 7% long-term discount rate of return. And I think when you look at the performance of both the fire and the pension funds, which are really snapshots of each other, they're very similar. Yeah, that's probably it. It's a little easier to read. Leave that, Tom, for a minute. The 13% composite index that Pat referred to is really the benchmark of the pension fund's portfolio. And again, that's based on the current money managers, and our rate of return is influenced by the fact that we, as he said, had 35%. Actually, our money manager had it around 40% in fixed income based on state law. So, but I think the long-term rate of return of 7% is a pretty, is supported by all these rates of return. So that was the point of just kind of giving you a snapshot of what happened in 2013 for the pension funds. With that, Mayor, I think that's just a snapshot and an update.
Okay,
Great.
very good. And
So-
then we're not
so-
talking about this?
Oh, I
We're
think,
going to have that on the website. too.
Okay.
I'll let Larry go after me, but if we could do, I think one thing I just want to end it with, because I don't think all the rest of the slides are Larry's, is, so I think the next step is we have to kind of go, even though it's very painful, I think we have to go back into sort of the pension process, or the pension process, the budget process, and sort of, again, try to, you know, scrub a little bit harder and come up with a little bit more money and try to do the best we can, do whatever we can before sort of April, at least by mid-May, before sort of the Moody's and S&P sort of take a relook at our
Well, I think
rating.
we're going to come back to the board with some refinancing opportunities in February and March to do the aggressive debt pay down. We'll explain it to the board with the hope that that can be part of what will address some of the budget deficit. And then that excess money would go into the pension funds.
Does anyone have questions?
One of the comments you made was, you know, streets or pension,
Right.
either or, right? That's not all together.
No, it's not. I
Hopefully
didn't
that's
mean to say it was all either or. We've done a number of, in the current budget, we have a budget for streets. I'm just saying when.
It suffered this year, it suffered because of, that's our commitment
Right.
to the pension.
Exactly.
Yes. And I just
Carol?
think, one other thing, you kind of went on for a bit. Everyone's here listening to the numbers while you guys go through this thing. What does it mean? Okay, we're in agreement. We're not gonna, no one here, I don't think, is gonna argue whether it's 7% return or 6.9% return or 7.1% return.
Right.
Right? And that's okay to talk about it, I guess, but what does it mean to us, right? How short are we? What do we gotta do to?
Well,
where
I
you
think
guys-
the resident.
Where are we going into? What
Right.
do we gotta go after? Where do we gotta get? That's what we gotta talk about.
Right. Well, the resident brought up the fact that we, on everyone's tax bills, we were at 68% of the village's committed pensions. My opinion is we need to be pushing towards the 90% level, 80 to 90%, because that is the target that is what state law is going to tell us we have to be at. Again, it's phased in. 2016 is a third, 2017 is 2/3, and 2018. So I think we're trying to get the board to buy in with our recommendation is to get debt paid down, decrease the risk of the village, and to commit more towards the pension funds. And so to answer your question, Mike, I think the goal would be to try to be, by the end of this decade, somewhere in the 80 to 90% range, and that what the resident brought up on their tax bill. And still, not, again, we've had this discussion with the Public Works Group, but not to divorce ourselves from the fact that we need to continue to do infrastructure, because we can't go back to what 2003 had, which is, Jack Gallagher could tell you, we deferred a lot of those projects. So in this current budget, we haven't taken out infrastructure, we've just decreased it from what the levels that we were at when we had $35 million of funding.
Yeah, and I just think, caution, I mean, we're kind of, this 111th Street's not going away, right?
Right.
He's mentioned there's some unforeseen. Larry, is that correct? We have a few extra expenses in 111th
We're
Street?
going to be talking about that in a second.
Yeah, that happens.
Right.
But,
Which is why, Mike, sorry to interrupt, but the refinancing opportunity, which I'll work with Larry on, will give us the money that we would have, that was in those overages, to still go back to that 1.2 million to pay down the debt, which then will go into the pension funds. So it doesn't mean, I think what we're trying to tell the board is right now, based on the preliminary look of 2013, the budget deficit looks like it's about 4.6 if we don't do anything, but we've got some things that we're going to come back to the board for your approval on.
Carol?
My comment, I mean, it sounds like definitely concerned about us being downgraded. And, that we should be acting sooner rather than later to avoid that from happening is what I'm hearing from the presentation and from meeting with Pat also. So are you guys suggesting possibly that this board get together and have some type of a budget workshop to work with you guys on this?
We were going
or-
to try for the last week in February. I was going to talk about that at the
Okay.
end, but, yeah, we need more, yeah. It's exceedingly painful, but not as painful as being downgraded.
Well, just so we're clear too, Mayor, the downgrades that Pat talked about has really not cost us anything. The way spreads are now, with interest rates as low as they are, frankly, the spreads are so tight that it hasn't, I think he talked about it being about $25,000, and these are all in our debt covenants. The last downgrade cost us, ballpark $25,000. If we were downgraded in the summer, it'd be about $189,000. It's all driven by the 111th Street debt, which is a floating rate piece of debt. I think if we go to a non-investment grade rating, and again, we are still a ways away from that, as Pat said, two rating categories. It eliminates, or it doesn't eliminate, it inhibits the flexibility that the village has to go to the debt market at cost-effective rates. And the difference between the two, just to give everyone that chart, maybe we can go back to that. Where's the, do you have it?
You want the
Pat, or-
packet?
No, just the rating, well, the rating agency grid, Tom, if we can go back to that. Just, okay, if you go by that Matson, that brown at the bottom, the difference in rate cost is about 100 basis points, which is 1%. So if we take all of our debt and we had to go to the market with it, and again, it's mostly when you issue debt, it's not when you've already got your debt. Debt gets traded, but it would cost, somewhere in the neighborhood of about $1 million a year. On 100 million, I'm just doing ballparks, 1% on 100 million costs the village about $1 million a year. So I'm in total agreement with Pat. The last thing this village board wants, I believe, is for us to get even close to non-investment grade, just because it eliminates a lot of flexibility with our capital structure. And that's what we've been working on. I think we have a lot of good things that have happened. Our fund balances are extraordinarily healthy. We've had a good year, and we're working on getting the numbers for 2013 to you guys, hopefully tomorrow, at least a preliminary look at those by each department. And I think that the water fund has performed well too. So I think we have a great story to tell. But as Pat said, it's with a negative bias. And I just think that we want to stem the tide, and we want to get you out in front of it, that's all.
So, and from a longer-term perspective, we just don't want to be where we're at. We want to move up to the level with the double A's, I think, in my view. But
Madam Mayor?
that's all we got.
Trustee Oliniechek.
I just am cautioning us as a board that, one of the things that in Public Works we have to concentrate on is, you had mentioned that there was talk of alleys. With the way this winter is hit, there's no way that we'll be able to do any alleys. The staff is already recommending that. Residents are going to be recommending that. We recommend that we put the money into the streets. And there are streets that didn't have any issues, but after the amount of cold that we've gone through, I'm really, really concerned with the conditions of our roads coming up in this next year and how we're going to be able to fund the streets. And we will have to put off on the alleys, but that's going to be another expenditure that this winter so far is playing havoc in our streets.
But I also want to make point, though, Alex, we have not cut in the current budget, the budget that this board approved, we did not cut streets and infrastructure down to zero. There's a budget for
I understand
that.
we took
And you
money
have to
off of it.
allocate
It was conservative, but we also did not predict that this winter was going to be as harsh as this winter is, and we need to be realists that through all the districts in all of the Village of Oak Lawn, everybody is going through the same thing we're all experiencing. Is a very harsh winter with a lot of salt, a lot of freezing, a lot of thawing, a lot of freezing, a lot of thawing, which is going to play havoc on our streets.
Mayor?
Trustee Straight.
Brian, you had mentioned that we were going to try to achieve the 90% level of pension funding by the end of this decade. Did I hear that correctly?
Well, no, what I was asked was my recommendation. I think that the goal should be to push towards that 90%. Do I think we'll get there by the end of this decade? I think one of the things we've got to do, Bob, frankly, to prepare for you guys is a 3 to 5 year plan and try to show that. Plus, we've got to show kind of how we're going to continue to address sewers and infrastructure, because as I said, Mike said it, there's a trade-off between pensions and the infrastructure needs of the village.
When are we required by law to achieve the 90% funding level?
Well, we have to, in 2016, which is the 2015 levy, so this year we did the 2013 levy, which is always 1 year behind the budget. Without boring everyone on the details, the levy for 2013, we're 2 levies behind when that law first goes into place. So 2016 budget year, 2015 levy. So 2 years from now, we have to put in 1/3 of that 90% calculation. 2017, it's 2/3, and 2018, it's the full amount.
Okay,
So,
but just for clarification, though, that is, that 90% level, there's the 90% of the recommended funding level each year,
Right.
which is what we have to achieve in 3 years. 90%, and I just want to make sure that the 90%, we're not going to be 90% funded. The pension will not be 90%
no,
funded.
that's correct.
Right.
No,
Okay.
the way to think of it, let's just talk about this year's numbers, and I'm really trying to get through this without boring everyone with numbers, but $7.2 million is the total pension that the actuary recommended for this year's budget. That means if you take 90% of that, you get $6.3 million, and we've put in the current budget from the levy and in the budget $3.4 million. We talked about the other 1.2, and our goal is to try to push up towards that 6.5. I realize we can't do it all in 1 year, but in my opinion, we need to start getting to those kinds of levels on a regular year after year basis. No, we're not going to be at 90% funded because the 2 funds, as this board knows, is at 65%.
And you're not trying to achieve the 90% funding level for the entire pension fund
No.
by the end of the decade?
Just for that year.
Okay.
So, and that's the way the calculation will work. And frankly, again, to use those numbers, they will take that difference. Let's just say the number that we were going to put in is 4.6. the requirement was 90% of that 7.2, which is 6.3, so that difference is, I know I'm hitting everyone with it, but 1.7. They'll take 1.7 million off of our sales tax. And by the way, just so everyone's clear, IMRF has been doing this for years with property taxes. So I don't want this to make it seem like police and fire are doing, or that these two funds are doing something that's unheard of. IMRF has been funded, and Pat's shown in previous presentations what the funding levels of that particular fund, and it's not nearly as unfunded as our police and fire. And again, our police and fire are a lot better funded than most funds throughout the state, but I think we want to try to get out in front of it, and that's been the goal that, frankly, since I've started working with Pat in July.
Brian, you can't finish that statement without adding the fact that the benefit level for those two funds you're referring to is set by the
That's correct.
legislature, not by the mayor and not by the Board of Trustees. And the menu for those benefits far exceeds the menu in terms of retirement age, in terms of how that benefit is calculated, and that's why that is a fairly large number.
No, I think that's correct, Larry. I think what we plan to do, Pat and I have talked about this today. Again, these presentations, we're going to try to do them very quickly, but in February, we want to show what the benefit for a police officer, for a fireman, for a 150 employee, for a carpenter, for a typical, an average resident, and we'll show the benefit cost. But Larry's exactly right. A lot of these other funds don't have a 3% kicker, and they don't compound like police and fire
Why don't
does.
we make a quick segue now to my
Well,
presentation?
Can I
we
just
have,
add
Trustee
one thing on this?
Oleandchuk.
In the 2013 pension results, one of the numbers that you put out there is total benefit payments and deductions, and you show 5.5 for fire, 5.4 million that was paid out. And you said that where's our treasurer? Pat, you said that the projected retirement for the fire department is how many?
40%, I think, fire and, Mike, is it police 20% or 18% or something like that?
So with that amount of, so that's on top of what we're already paying, we're going to see an increase of 40% just due to retirements too, or 20%?
The work's like that, but you'll see a big spike, but we'll show you in the future. It's a big spike. I don't know if the math works where it's at 40% spike. I guess it's pretty damn close.
But my concern is this, we're going to see an even bigger spike. So at the same time, we're required to put more money into it. We're going to have more people retiring at that same thing. So we're chasing money now. We're trying to get money put in there, and then we're going to have people that are due their benefit pulling money out. So not only do we have to chase what we're already behind, but we're going to have to put money in or be wary of the amount of money that's going to be taken out to a due benefit. So that to me is a bigger, and I would appreciate to see a 3 to 5 year plan on that.
Yep. And Brian's talked about that a couple different times in the past, whereas, they talk about if once you get under the 50% rate, it's really hard to sort of, keep traction on things because of, you have so much money going out. But, yep, that's, I think, part of our 3 to 5 year exercise, which we'll be doing for you guys in a couple months.
Mayor, could I ask one more question about?
Certainly.
Okay, and Brian, you said that you've gave us, your words were that I want to get ahead of this. And we're, we keep talking about the concern about the TIF costs at 111th and Cicero. I'm wondering how much of the trying to get ahead of it is about the TIF at 111th and Cicero versus, let's say, other village spending.
Well, Larry will go into the TIF, but I
Go
think.
back to the pie again, if you could, Joanne, of the distribution by percentage of that debt. Bob?
Yeah.
And if you could point to the 111th,
Oh,
33%.
it's the red, it's the 30.
Well, the TIF is, no, the TIF is, yeah, the red, Larry, is, there's two different TIF numbers up there. It says TIF to the right, but 111.
111 separate.
111 TIF, right. Joanne's right, it's the maroon, or red, or whatever.
Okay. Well, briefly, Bob, and I'll get into this. You heard our treasurer say as far as more proactive discussion on the TIF. That's what we're going to be doing. And then you have on the agenda trustee Carberry, has made what I think is an excellent suggestion about some of the work being done by this board in a workshop setting, which is open to the public. We just don't run the televisions. The public is here to listen. There's not dialogue back and forth. We still continue to have these regular meetings, but in a workshop, we take on what I call mega issues. And this is a mega issue that you need an hour talking with staff, with the developer, and going over big issues, whether it's water, whether it's the TIF. In the case of this TIF, I call it good debt. Now, Pat and I are like yin and yang. There is no such thing, he'll say, as good debt. I could argue with him that there's good debt. And what I mean by good debt is that you're creating a revenue stream because the village owns the ground. You have a developer who's sharing in the rent. When Mariano's goes up and other buildings, we get a percentage of the net revenue. And then you have an exit plan, which we've always publicly talked about, where we will be selling eventually our interest, as well as Hamilton, to an institutional investor who will be buying that based on rules of return, who the tenants are. And you'll be paying off a portion of your debt while the reconfigured TIF, which we're going to be talking about, generates through the incremental taxes the money to pay off that debt entirely. So the good news about that debt, there is a plan and there's a revenue stream without increasing taxes, just targeting the taxes to make that successful. And I'll kind of get into that.
Yeah, and all I was really saying, Bob, is with the two fund balances that we had, the general fund balance of, at the end of the year, was a little over $6 million, and the water fund was about $7 million. And because of the commitments at 111th for the final properties, we're going to come back to you with a refinancing of that piece of debt, okay, which is, just so everyone's clear, right now that's with Fifth Third, and we pay 1.3% on that piece of debt. So we would come back, refinance that a little bit for what we've had to pay, and beef up the fund balance, and then use that money to pay that debt down that we had talked about in the budget, which would replace that 1.2 million. All we're simply saying is right now, our fund balances, because we've had to use it for, to be the bank, in effect, we're sort of like on this suspended animation point in the year. And that's what we've talked to Larry about, and he'll talk, he can talk to everything, all the exciting stuff that's going on out there. We're just trying to deal with the costs.
Before I lose our fine treasure here, I just wanted to tell the board that the very, very thorough presentation you've seen that Pat, Joanne, Brian, staff, management team back and forth is a dynamic process that isn't static. That's why we're going to return, as the mayor said, in February, and that's why we're looking towards even maybe carving off more money on this budget. Because the presentation you gave, that was given to you, is brutally honest, and I mean brutally honest. And it's something that this board committed when you were elected and you talked as a group here through the summer months, to submit a budget, approve a budget, and not kick the can down the road. These are tough issues. We heard telecommunicators speaking here earlier. There's a lot more than what was said. Obviously, everybody feels there's no desire to have an employee of this fine organization lose a position. But it's been 11 months and a lot of issues discussed. And that was a decision that was rendered under the complete guidance and presence of an Illinois-appointed mediator from an Illinois State Labor Board and union officials agreeing to the proposed settlement, which the board will talk about in executive session and then come out in public session and make a decision to support or not support. I have recommended the settlement, and for, I believe, a lot of good reasons. Does that mean I'm happy? No, it doesn't mean I'm happy. But the fact of the matter is we're facing some very, very tough decisions, and we will not get through this without you as residents, giving advice and counsel to your mayor and your elected Board of Trustees and our employees. And I'm going to repeat, our employees, from me right down to every part-time employee, has a role to play in our ability to